Round 5 of the Precision Racing League's iRacing Sunday Series Season 7 featured another 45-minute race at the Watkins Glen Classic layout. With an average lap speed of over 150 miles per hour, the race was sure to be thrilling, and the league didn't disappoint. Taking pole position was Frederick Elmstrom with a time of 55.195, while championship leader David Wormold would have to settle for second best. Mikko Muutalainen finished qualifying as the fastest USUC Finn driver and the only other person to set a time below 56 seconds. John Bell starts alongside Mikko in an impressive fourth as the fastest of the new Sauber Motorsports team. James Myers and Esteverson Oliveira share row 3, and with qualifying times that were only 0.02 of a second apart, they are likely to be ones to watch in the race. Row 4 is All-American with Justin Sutton in 7th and Sauber boss Andrew Kissinger in 8th. On row 5 is Alan Pajari in 9th and the third Sauber driver of Nick Garforth. Bringing up the rear is Ashley Blakely, but his qualifying time was not a good representation of his real pace, so he'll be another driver to keep an eye on. At the start, Fred pulled away from David and kept his lead heading into turn 1. Mikko got a slightly better start than John, while both Esteverson and James struggled from row 3. Justin stayed in the middle of the track, and when Andrew went for a gap between Esteverson and James, he made contact with Justin. Justin appeared to be waiting to see what would happen between the teammates ahead of him when suddenly there was contact with Andrew's rear right wheel. Justin was sent into the barrier at high speed before tumbling towards turn 1. The damage was unfortunately significant, and he required a tow to the pits, which took over 2 minutes. Replays from Alan's point of view showed just how easily this incident could have involved more cars, but thankfully no one else was affected. Back at the front, David had anticipated the inherent weakness in pole position at this track and set himself up for an overtake on Fred. They went side by side through turns 2, 3, and 4, but when they came onto the long back straight, it was David who had the inside line for the loop, and he took the lead without much issues. Fred fought back on the run down to the penultimate corner, but again David had the inside line and maintained the position while Fred ran wide and lost another position to Mikko. While the leaders were duking it out, there were battles behind as well, one in particular between David's teammates Esteverson and James. James had the inside line for turns 1 and 2, but couldn't stick around at the outside of turn 3, which put him behind Esteverson and put him under threat from Andrew as well. Andrew tried to move at the inside of the loop on James, but James carried more speed and stayed ahead. Ash was also on the move as he lined up Nick coming out of turn 4. With a slipstream down the back straight and the inside line for the loop, Ash moved past Nick after already passing both Justin and Alan at the start of the race, now in 8th position. At the start of lap 2, John was being pressured by Steverson for his 4th place position. Steverson was much closer in the tow of John than John was to Fred, and with the extra straight line speed on the back straight, he gained yet another position. One lap later, and Allen was the one who was on the attack as he eyed Nick's 9th place position. With a great run through the first 4 corners, Allen breezed by Nick and turned his focus towards Ash in 8th, who had already begun to build a gap. At the end of the lap, James was coming under heavy attack from Andrew in 7th place, who considered a move at turn 1, but thought better of it. Andrew clearly wasn't just interested in taking a position from James, but also wanted to defend against Ash, who was now within striking distance. Andrew stayed behind until the straight, where he took the inside line once again heading into the loop. Once again, however, James held his line around the outside and defended the position. At this point, not only was Ash a threat, but Allen had also caught this battle for 6th place. Lap 5 is when Fred finally made a move on Miko for 2nd place. As with many of the overtakes already attempted so far in the race, Fred used the slipstream coming out of turn 1 to gain a top speed advantage over the Finn. Miko knew that he could only defend for so long, so he didn't defend too hard. Miko had the inside line though for the loop, but it didn't matter as Fred was far enough ahead to take the racing line. Behind the battle for 3rd, Ash was still stuck behind James and Andrew. He looked strong at the start, but his momentum had been cut short, and at this point he was defending from Allen more than he was attacking Andrew. Allen had a great run through the first set of corners and went around the outside of Ash at the loop. While the drivers were battling for position, Justin got his tow to the pits, but forgot to enable the pit lane speed limiter and received a stop-go penalty. He did a lap and came straight back to serve the penalty. By the time he exited the pits again to start his 3rd lap, he was already nearly 3 laps down on the leaders. On lap 6, Ash looked to regain the position he'd lost to Allen the lap prior. He looked good for an easy overtake down the back straight, especially when Allen decided not to defend the inside line. Amazingly though, Allen copied James and stuck around the outside and came out of the loop with more momentum than Ashley and held on to his 8th place position. Ash tried again on lap 7 to move back ahead of Allen, but Allen proved that he would be a formidable opponent at the Glen. Ash had the slipstream, but couldn't gain enough ground to challenge into the loop. At the end of the lap, it appeared that James was starting to build a serious gap to Andrew, and his 6th place position might be safe. When James clipped the curb at the inside of the final corner, though, he caught a bit of oversteer, which lowered his speed coming onto the start-finish straight. James caught a lucky break moments later, however, as Andrew took too much curb at the inside of turn 1 and spun, losing him positions to Allen, Ashley, and Nick. Meanwhile, Ash and Allen resumed their battle, and once again, Allen stayed ahead, but with less than 10 of the 45 minutes completed in the race, how much longer could he hold out? The answer to that question came just 2 laps later as Alan went wide at turn 1 and spun into the barrier, losing him positions to both Ash and Nick, but also losing him a position to Andrew, who spun at the same corner 2 laps prior. Lap 11, and John was beginning to feel the pressure from Steverson in the battle for 4th place. At this point, the top 3 had already built a significant gap to the rest of the field, and without any major incidents, Steverson likely knew that his fight was with John. The pressure became a bit too much for John as he spun at turn 1 in similar fashion to Andrew. He managed to avoid the barrier but lost positions to Steverson, Ash, and Nick, landing him in 7th place halfway through the first stint. On lap 18, David encountered his first lap traffic as he closed in on Justin. Already 2 laps down on the rest of the field, Justin was about to lose another lap. Justin knew that his teammate Miko was still running in 3rd position and could use a little bit of help catching David and Fred. Justin pulled towards the pit exit coming out of turn 1 in an effort to let David and Fred through without giving them the benefit of the slipstream. Just a handful of laps later, and Miko was close enough in the slipstream of Justin that Justin began to worry about slowing Miko down in the corners. He gave him the tow at the start of lap 23 before moving far to the right side of the track and letting Miko through. At the end of lap 23, and still trying to claw his way back towards David, Fred went wide for the 2nd time this race at the penultimate corner. He managed to keep the car pointing in the right direction and out of the barrier, but he lost significant time to David. This was a huge win for David as they rapidly approached their pit stops. While Fred was struggling and Miko was lapping Justin, James was starting lap 23 and he had Alan just behind him, but Alan was just starting lap 22. Unlapping himself from David might be a difficult task, but James was a more realistic ambition. Alan got the slipstream down the back straight but couldn't pull alongside James heading into the loop. Alan got a much better run at the exit of the turn, however, and moved past James with the inside line for the penultimate corner. At the end of lap 24, and with the pit window firmly open, Andrew became the first person to make a planned pit stop. At the end of lap 25, James made his one and only stop of the race, while Ashley behind him continued down the road to complete another lap. On lap 26, the race leader David dove into the pits for his stop, followed by Miko not far behind, who also pit at the end of lap 26. Ash also opted to pit on lap 26, and he was followed into the pit lane by John. James had come out of the pits just ahead of Justin, who was still 2 laps down on him, and when James was starting lap 27, he found the rear wing of Ash, who had stayed out a lap later and managed to jump James in the pits. Ash had track position, James had the slipstream, and Justin had an excellent view of the battle between them. James stayed to the right and took the inside line for the loop, but Ash stayed with him around the outside, and they exited still side by side. They drag raced towards the penultimate corner, and Ash had the inside line this time, but James carried more speed and took the position heading into the final corner. While James and Ashley were battling for position, the new race leader Fred was into the pits for his stop. This was an excellent opportunity for him to gain time in his quest to catch David, but it wasn't to be, as David went flying by while Fred was still stationary in the box. Just before Fred exited the pits, Stevenson was entering the pits for a late stop at the end of lap 27. Shortly after Stevenson exited the pits, Nick came into the pits at the end of lap 27 for his stop. Shortly after that, the battling duo of James and Ashley came screaming down the start-finish straight with Justin just behind. On lap 30, the epic battle between Ash and James reached another peak as once again Ash tried to move past the American. With Justin 3 laps down on the leaders and Miko struggling to catch Fred for second place, Ash was the last hope for Yusuck Finn to take some points away from 3 Shades of Awesome. James had the inside line for the loop this time, but Ash managed to carry more speed through, which gave him another run on James down towards the penultimate corner. Ash thought better of it and stayed behind as Justin dove into the pits from just behind them for his refueling stop. At this point in the race, Alan was already a lap down on David and Fred and was being caught by Miko at quite a rate of knots. Alan went a bit wide at the exit of the loop and dipped a wheel in the grass, which sent him into the barrier. The resulting impact sent him flying across the circuit, where he was narrowly missed by Miko at high speed. Not long after Alan's accident, Andrew came into the pits for an as-of-yet unknown reason. He pulled into his box and received service, but then proceeded to remain in the box as the field went by. Nick had a very similar incident at the exit of the loop to that of Alan's the lap prior. Nick was even more unlucky than Alan and wedged his car in the Armco, forcing a tow to the pits. Lap 33 and Ash was at it again. He was all over the back of James coming out of turn 1, but had to lift off the throttle to avoid contact with the back of him. He didn't quite have the speed to force James into a side-by-side battle through turns 2, 3, and 4, and James defended the inside line coming down the back straight once again. Ash tried braking very, very late in an effort to overtake James around the outside of the loop, but ended up running wide and giving James a much-deserved break from defending. On lap 35, Fred gave a masterclass in how to overtake someone at the Glen without using the loop or the back straight as he was lapping John. Shortly after Fred went by to start his 35th lap, Andrew came out of the pits right behind Justin and Nick, and he was now 3 laps down on the leaders, just like Justin. It became obvious that Andrew had come into the pits and was waiting for Justin to catch him in a fantastic display of sportsmanship as a result of the lap 1 incident. Nick was 2 laps ahead of Justin and Andrew, currently on lap 34, but allowed Justin to unlap himself at the outside of the loop, despite Justin's hesitation. One lap later, Andrew got his opportunity to unlap himself from Nick. With the toe down the back straight, Andrew moved past Nick and was now free to pursue Justin. Amazingly, as David was starting lap 40, he'd caught up to the back of the battling Ash and James, who were still locked in close quarters combat. This was an excellent opportunity for James, depending on how things worked out. Ash didn't make David's job very difficult as David breezed by down the back straight. Ash had visibly lost ground to James, but would now have the benefit of David's slipstream and improved lap times. If Ash played his cards right, he could follow David through ahead of James. On lap 41, it came time for James to let David through, and he didn't lift off the throttle nearly as much as Ash had the lap prior. David knew his gap to Fred and likely told his teammate not to lift on the radio. David got the slipstream and took the inside line for the loop, going side by side with James, much to the delight of Ash. James didn't lose much time on the straight, but he'd certainly lost some time in the corner, which meant Ash still had a shot. Fred wasn't far behind though, so Ash and James would have to accommodate another driver soon. Just 3 laps after David went through, Fred was now on the back of Ash and ready to lap him. Fred closed on Ash much quicker than David had, and not only did Ash not need to lift, he actually got a bit of a slipstream from Fred at the end of the straight. If Ash could stick closer to Fred than he had to David, he could gain some serious ground on James. In the closing stages of the race, John had another moment at turn 1, but this time he made contact with the barrier. He limped his DW12 back to the pits, but the damage caused a spin at the pit entrance, which lost him even more time. Two laps after lapping Ash, Fred was now all over the back of James, and even more importantly, Ash was all over the back of Fred. Ash had used Fred's slipstream to much greater effect than he had with David and looked to be in a good position to overtake James. When Fred forced James into a side-by-side battle through the loop, Ash gained even more ground on James, and they finished the lap drag racing side-by-side towards turn 1. Ash had the inside line, but James carried more speed, similar to the battle between Steverson on the first lap, but this time James had the inside line for turn 3 and managed to stay ahead of Ash as they headed onto the back straight. Once again, Ash would have the tow, but his poor exit speed coming out of turn 3 meant he would have to hang back for now. As Fred started lap 48, the white flag was out, which meant Ash now had less than 60 seconds to make his move on James. With Fred off in the distance, it meant that James would no longer be receiving the benefit of the slipstream and would be vulnerable to attack from Ash. Ash stuck close to James through the first 4 corners, and James once again defended the inside line for the loop. But Ash was more determined than ever and hung it around the outside and gave himself not only a great exit speed, but the inside line heading into the penultimate corner. He nearly took the racing line, but opted to play it safe and stayed in the middle of the track at the entrance for the turn. James had the better exit speed, but the short run down to the final corner meant that Ash would stay ahead and finish narrowly in front of James as the checkered flag waved. But there could be only one winner, and that was once again David Wormald. After starting from second place on the grid, he'd driven a nearly flawless race. A great pit stop combined with an aggressive overtake at the beginning of the race had set him up for another notch on his belt for the season, and at what was arguably the most intense race of the season because of the average lap speed. In the end, David finished over 5 seconds ahead of Fred, with Mikko a further 16 seconds back. Another 29 seconds behind Mikko came Steverson, who had a relatively quiet second half to his race. Ash took 5th as the first of the lapped cars, with James in hot pursuit, while John and Nick took 7th and 8th respectively, both of them 2 laps down on David. Despite all of Alan's struggles, he managed to finish ahead of Justin in 9th place, while Justin managed to hold off Andrew's pressure for 10th, and all 3 of them finished 3 laps down on the leaders. In the Drivers' Championship, David extended his lead over Justin to a whopping 42 points, while Fred is now into 3rd place, just 6 points behind Justin, while the gap between 3rd and 9th is now just 18 points and with 7 races still remaining. In the Road Championship, David still leads after his 2nd consecutive road win with 61 points to Mikko's 48, and Steverson moves ahead of Justin with 38 points to Justin's 32. In the safety standings, amazingly, Justin managed to pick up just 2 incident points despite his crash on the first lap, which means he moves ahead of Fred with more than double the CPI after Fred picked up 5 incident points at Watkins Glen. Even more amazing, both Ash and James managed to finish the race with 0 incident points despite their constant battling. And finally, in the Teams Championship, 3 Shades of Awesome continues to assert their dominance at the top with 3 race wins and 182 points. USUC Finn has proven to be a bit more consistent, though, with 10 finishes in the top 5. They are averaging 2 drivers in the top 5 at every race this season and have 148 points. The new Sauber Motorsports team start their championship with 73 points and will certainly be looking to close the gap in the second half of the season. Let's hear from the top 3 finishers as the drivers do what they always do after a race, destroy their cars.
Well, I knew that I didn't have the pace that David and Frederick had, so after the first 5 laps I pretty much knew that that was gonna be my finishing position if they didn't collide with each other. So after the pit stops I saw that the gap was about 10 seconds, so it was pretty much a Sunday drive after that.
I came into the race with a good feeling, and then on lap 1, the penultimate corner, I just had understeer when I was side by side with David, and yeah, from there it was backwards until I, on lap 7 or 8 I think, got past Mikko, who also overtook me when I had the massive understeer. And I got pretty close to David, but I couldn't get past him, and after the pit stops he was just gone and I couldn't pass him, sadly.
Pretty much enjoyed my race from start to finish. It was interesting to be fighting with Fred in qualifying, and he managed to pull the lap out of the bag. I didn't have a very good qualifying session. I'm really happy with what I managed to do on the first lap, which was the plan all along. I actually knew that pole here was a little bit of a disadvantage, so I wasn't too bothered to be starting second, because I knew I'd be able to try and outdrag him all the way up the hill. And that's exactly what happened, and after an exciting first lap where we were side by side for most of the lap, I just controlled the race from there on in, hit my marks for my pit stop, and that was that.